Though my house was fortunate enough to keep its original woodwork intact, it needs more than a little effort in cleaning it up. Still, better than countless hours of stripping paint. And why exactly did that happen? And when? Did fashion suddenly declare that wood grain was absolutely horrible and everything must be white? Or were there other reasons that hopefully made a little bit more sense? Even with our trendy fluctuations from golden oak to gray to white oak, we haven't really been ripping everything out every decade. At least between all of the builders magazines and interior design books, we should be able to find some answers. Of course, our reasons for white trim being the standard today are pretty far removed from the potential ones of the past. Since wood became so expensive, we came up with alternatives like MDF that allow for waste to form trim much faster and cheaper. It won't look like typical wood grain, however, so paint is the standard option. MDF only took off in the 1980s though, and white woodwork seems to have stretched back further than that. Even then, you would think that white, or any painted woodwork, would have been considered the cheap option at that point, and natural woods the ideal, a way to cover up poor quality. The amount of carpets that have more recently covered up hardwood floors shows that that's not the case. But that's a video for another day. What we are looking for here isn't the switch to cheaper painted trim that obviously happened to save money. It's the choice to paint over or even totally replace natural wood trims in older houses. The renovations over the decades that we like to say ripped out the soul of an old house. In my case, the 1960s desire for a half wall, taking out both an arched doorway and my air conditioning. I have a lot of renovation to do. Now, if you're really into discoveries and renovation, I have a much better option for you than buying an old house, because the sponsor for this week is Love and Pies. Love and Pies is a cozy puzzle game where you get to uncover town mysteries while rebuilding a family cafe with gorgeous graphics and adorable characters. You match up different ingredients to fill customers' orders and move forward in the story. You also earn upgrades to the shop as you go, expanding into new areas to repair. Each room has different options, so you get to decorate in your favorite colors and style. Construction always digs up a few new questions too, which I suppose is always the case with any renovation, but these are always fun discoveries. It's super relaxing, perfect to pick up throughout the day and play at my own speed. I love meeting all of the creative characters and getting their backstories, and there's always enough extra events going on where you can fix up special areas around town or challenge yourself with little games. Download now using my link and reach day 3 within the next week to claim a sweet treat, 200 energy and 50 gems. I promise it'll be a much more fun way to renovate and discover. Thanks again to Love and Pies for sponsoring this week's video. Now let's go back to how woodwork was dealt with a century or two ago, when many houses with elaborate trim were being constructed. While we are replanting trees at a rate higher than we are using them, at least in the US, it takes decades, if not centuries, to grow. Even then, fast growth results in lower quality woods that aren't as tough. One of the major reasons that this area of the world was colonized was to access the massive quantities of wood for construction of buildings, furniture, ships, and more. As for woodwork options around the turn of the 20th century, they had a wide range of choices. Hardwoods like oak, ash, chestnut, birch, and cherry were often mentioned, as well as softwoods like pine, cypress, red gum, poplar, and whitewood. A lot of the time construction relied on local sources, even well after trains and trucks brought variety across the country easily. My own family had furniture made out of cherry trees from the farm in the early 20th century. On the opposite end of things, standard trim for houses was widely mass-produced and sold pre-cut at least a century ago. There's a good chance that's where this trim would have come from. Though the windows and door frames are made up of plain pieces that create a stepped look, the baseboards have a slight curve to the top edge that would have required specialty equipment. Likely much cheaper to just buy that in bulk, not unlike our modern system. Catalogs offer a wide range of cuts, sizes, and woods to work with any style of home. Not every wood was useful for all options, however. Heavier grains were recommended for places like the living and dining rooms, finer grains for the bedrooms, and cypress or white pine for the kitchen and bathroom were considered ideal because they could handle the moisture. Most of the restrictions are based on the tendency to warp or swell. Paneling an entire library floor to ceiling in a wood that was going to change sizes every season would be a terrible choice. Now we have much more regulated temperatures and humidity inside, but even things like a steamy bathroom can cause a lot of damage. My house was definitely a victim of that problem. All of the wood in there has almost blackened because it wasn't refinished often enough to keep out the water. Moisture is also the reason why all wood had to be finished in some way. Whether accomplished by varnish or paint didn't matter so much. We have pressure-treated wood today that's less susceptible, but a century ago, even the internal parts of the house could easily rot away if they were exposed to regular moisture and that wasn't dealt with ahead of time. Makes sense, but why then pick varnish or paint specifically? Some of it comes down to effort. Historically, there are times where painted trim was a fashionable option. If we go back further to the 18th century, for example, there was a whole range of painted color schemes that included woodwork and paneling. Natural wood was still popular, of course, but plenty of expensive buildings covered that up. I wondered about this until I started finding more instructions on how to properly paint, or more specifically enamel, and they are complicated. Layer after layer, specifically processed with lots of time to dry in between, with copious buffing, and not easy to care for after. I've helped to make 18th century paint before, but hadn't really pondered how that extra effort to paint something right might actually make it the costlier option. I was just painting fabric to make it waterproof. Obviously, this still depends on the wood, of course, but at least with a range of old-growth woods easily available, and enameling taking days of effort for the right finish, it's sort of like the current trend for high-gloss paint. Not a task to be taken lightly, and it really does seem a bit extra. Even as partially pre-mixed options came on the market in the early 20th century for paint, they weren't always ready to go. Instructions included first cleaning the wood with soda water, lime, then using linseed oil and turpentine for redwoods, or a mix of white and red lead for pine to serve as a primer. The actual paint would then need a variety of different add-ins to get the properly drying finish, as well as relying on the customer to do all of the color mixing themselves. Another article mentions white paint for pine be made of white lead thinned with oil, turpentine, and a Japan dryer. Make sure you use an old brush to avoid leaving texture behind. Apparently turpentine is picky like that. The oil chosen also mattered, since some were less elastic and prone to cracking in time. As the century progressed, more and more products came on the market that took out another step here or there. In the 1920s, undercoaters were available that just needed a little bit of thinner added to make a good white enamel for trim. As for stain, just like paint, there weren't pre-mixed options available just yet. However, it could be done with a little less care. A 1909 article explains the author's favorite mix of burnt umber, asphaltum, and gasoline. Paint it on thick, wipe it off after a little bit, and varnish. Much simpler, even though it sounds like it would both smell horrible and be more than a little flammable. Which does explain one of the weirder reasons I came across for painting: fireproofing. Instead of linseed oil based, do silicate of soda, followed by a lime wash to form silicate of lime. I wouldn't assume either paint or varnish to be fireproof or anything other than highly flammable, to be honest, in this time period. So definitely not the deciding factor in paint versus natural for most people. Instead, we need to head back to look at trends. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, variations on wood types and stain colors continued to fluctuate. It was even common to use different woods or stains in varying rooms around the house. Some things were more stable because of their high or low cost, but like we talked about in the Art Deco video, a great deal of 19th century interior decor was harkening back to previous eras. Regardless, anything that's fashionable eventually becomes old. Even as late as 1915, natural wood was still considered a more modern option, albeit in specific finishes and types. An article from that year recommended replacing old trim that's thickly coated with paint or enamel with new birch trim. Presumably, we're talking about older homes that have maybe decades of different color schemes built up. Modern at that time is a natural finish or varnish, not paint or enamel. They claim it's also much easier to refresh that way. But that's birch and not the old, detailed, darker options of the past decades. In fact, at that time, old detailed woodwork was seen as garish and ugly. One article even claimed it was preferred only by, quote, rural customers. It was around this time that painted woodwork started to pick up in magazines. As early as 1904, Harper's Bazaar recommended to paint the woodwork white to carry out the delicate scheme. Others brought it up as a way to bring light into a very dark wood-clad room, like a dining room. Just paint the woodwork in an off-white and do buff or yellow on the walls. Now, this wasn't so much an effort to completely modernize, just yet. Colonial, or Louis XV, was trendy, and that was recalled as having hardwood finished and softwood painted white. A 1910 Harper's Bazaar declared, "We can breathe a thankful sigh for the softwood painted white, and begin to cherish a hope that the era of boastful pride in the possession of natural finished hardwood is passing," which speaks to the use of natural hardwood being an ideal prior to that point. The longer article was all about thinking ahead on your woodwork and treating it like a picture frame. The whole of the room and the house decor needs to fit well within the chosen frame. And white is easy. I get it. Nothing was harder to pick colors for than the 1980s house I lived in with very yellow stained oak. Especially for those who already had painted trim, while it can be stripped of paint and the stain changed, painting over it is by far the easiest process and the easiest to design around. Those two reasons mentioned before, light and color scheme, keep coming up throughout the next couple of decades. Not that woodwork is out totally, it's just that you need to treat the woodwork as a color in the room. Make sure that your other colors blend with that range of rust or brown tones. And there are acknowledged benefits to keeping the natural wood, as some of the early reservations on white trim seem to be about keeping it clean. Not surprisingly, natural wood hides a lot more dust and dirt than bright white. White woodwork, while adding to the daintiness of a house, also adds to the cares of the housekeeper. Every finger mark sullies it. But articles insist it's just a little bit of soap and water to fix it. Ironic, given that the discussion would flip the other way as we move into the late 1930s. Painting became a great option for woodwork in poor condition, a problem during and after World War II, given the restrictions on both supplies and professionals available to do the labor of keeping woodwork looking fresh. Again, noting that regular care is what keeps the sun and moisture damage at bay. Even more of an issue in the UK than the US, one suggestion of painting the woodwork specifically calls out how it can cover up damaged wood from fire or explosion, including glass fragments. Back over here, a 1943 article gives great instructions on how to strip down old woodwork yourself and either varnish or paint it after. In this case, they recommend painting the kitchens, bathroom, and bedrooms. These rooms come up the most often in early trends of white trim. Sometimes it's purely practical, like this 1912 advice to use white enamel in the bathroom to help with waterproofing. Others say that it feels more bright and has a sanitary appearance to use white in the kitchen or bathroom. This idea of bright and sanitary is what modern ideals for interiors become over the next few decades. Post-war articles talk about modernizing the homes specifically by painting woodwork to match the walls. Modern now is clean and simple, and painted woodwork can even be done in the same colors as the walls to help it blend in. And it didn't stop there. Some suggested more than just painting the woodwork to update. In the 1930s and 40s, there were trends of painting Victorian furniture white. There's this recommendation from 1934 to reupholster in white imitation leather as well. They do say not to paint over good mahogany or walnut, but it's no crime to transform hideous black walnut of the General Grant period with layers of white. In that case, you are doing a real favor to the furniture. Similar suggestions from 1940 say to paint walnut white and recover with a dull pink velvet or floral chintz. If painting the woodwork and furniture wasn't enough, to modernize a tired old house, then move on to the bricks around the fireplace, or add plywood trim to the windows. If we keep going to the 1960s, it might require an entire transformation of woodwork. Unless it can be painted to match the walls, they thought most old woodwork was too prominent and wide. Instead, rip out the old and start over, or at least cut it down. Old baseboards were apparently more like 6 to 12 inches, but modern trim was 3 to 4 inches. So just pull it out, rip it down, put it back in. Yes, I clutched my imaginary pearls when I read that one. There were alternative finishing trends over the years as well. Bleaching wood, especially oak, came up throughout the 1930s and 40s as a way to lighten the look of a room without having to paint. My personal favorite was using paint to create contrasting fills and stains. Something like a warm stain and a jade green paint used to fill in the gaps, essentially painted on and wiped off. There weren't any pictures from this article from 1928, sadly, but I imagine it's akin to modern whitewashing, but colorful and less filmy. I'm honestly curious enough to try this on some scrap wood eventually. Of course, not everyone appreciated painted trim. For all of the articles explaining how to do it, there were just as many on how to undo it. Sometimes it was to manage a bad application. This 1911 article talked about how one couple dealt with the sticky paint left from the previous owners. They tried turpentine and rubbing it off, blow torches, and ended up using potash. And no, these weren't out of the box ideas. Another article a few years later talks about how charcoal stove paint remover, literally hot coals and ash, used to be the preferred method, but the naphtha torch made the process so much easier. Just make sure to check for birds' nests and other flammable materials first, and don't do it on a windy day. I admit I have used a heat gun to remove paint before, but that wasn't on wood. Overall, the desire to save good woodwork and the history behind it goes back further than I expected. In fact, by 1912, architectural salvage was already a thing, and what they considered to be better old wood was being saved from buildings. That's a crazy thought with how prized even 19-teens woodwork is now. For me, I'm sticking to a little bit of stain and oil. First is a lot of Murphy's oil soap. Seriously, the difference in something like a door where hands touched it every day is both amazing and concerning. Eventually, I do have to repaint the windows, and I am going to just paint the window frames in the 1960s extension. I doubt the wood is worth uncovering there. I have, however, pulled back a little bit of the carpet on the stairs where I'm going to refinish the first step and landing. Eventually, a new runner for the rest, but despite how dirty that carpet currently is, I still enjoy not falling down the stairs for now. And if for some reason you do want to watch what may be hours of footage of me cleaning woodwork, head on over to my Patreon or YouTube memberships. I've been posting a lot of decor updates there too. Hopefully it will be on to painting soon. I'm having to learn how to plaster first, which has to happen before cleaning all the woodwork, which has to happen before painting. It's a thing. Anyway, if anyone knows how to get a lifetime supply of Murphy's oil soap, that would be great.